How to win friends and influence people. Part 1. The fundamental techniques in handling people. If you want to gather honeybees, don't kick over the beehives. On May 1931, the most sensational Manhattan, New York City, ever had known had come to its climax. After weeks of search, two guns, Crowley, the killer, the gunman who didn't smoke or drink, was at the bay, trapped in his sweetheart's apartment on the West End Avenue. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege to his top floor hideaway. They chopped holes in the roof. They tried to smoke out Crowley, the cop killer, with tear gas. Then they mounted their machine guns on surrounding buildings, and for more than 1 hour of New York's fine residential area was reverberated with cracks of pistol fires and the ratata of machine guns. Crowley, crouching behind an overstuffed chair, fired intensely at the police. 10,000 excited people watched the battle. Nothing like it had ever been seen before on the sidewalks of New York. When Crowley was captured, Police Commissioner E.P. Moreland declared that the two-gun desperado was one of the most dangerous criminals ever encountered in the history of New York. "He will kill," said the commissioner, at the drop of a feather. But how did Two Guns Crowley regard himself? We know because while the police were firing onto his apartment, he wrote a letter addressed "To whom it may concern." And as he wrote, the blood flowing from his wound left a crimson trail on the paper. In the trail, Crowley said, "Under my coat is a very hard but a kind one. The one would nobody do any harm." After a short time before this, Crowley had been having a necking party with his girlfriend on a country road out on Long Island. Suddenly, a policeman walked up to a car and said, "Let me see your license." Without saying a word, Crowley drew his gun and cut the policeman down with a shower of lead. As the dying officer fell, Crowley leapt out of his car, grabbed the officer's revolver, and fired another bullet into the prostrate body. And then was the killer who said, "Under my coat is a very hard but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." Crowley was sentenced to an electric chair. When he arrived at the death house in Sing Sing, did he say, "This is what I get for killing people"? No, he said, "This is what I get for defending myself." After the point of the story is, Two Guns Crowley didn't blame himself for anything. Is that an usual attitude among criminals? If you think so, listen to this. "I have spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pressure, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse, the existence of a haunted man." That's AI Capion speaking. Yes, America's most notorious public enemy, the most sinister gang leader who ever shot up Chicago. Capion didn't condemn himself. He actually regarded himself as a public benefactor, an unappreciated and misunderstood public benefactor. And so did Dutch Sulch before he crumbled up under a gangster bullet in Newmark. Dutch Sulchers, one of the New York's most notorious rats, said in a newspaper interview that he was a public benefactor, and he believed it. I have some interesting correspondence with Louis Laws, who was warden of New York's infamous Sing Sing prison for many years on the subject, and he declared that few of the criminals in Sing Sings regarded themselves as bad men. They are just as human as you and I, so they rationalize, they explain. They can tell you why they had to crack a safe or be quick on the trigger finger. Most of them attempted by a form of reasoning, fallacious or logical, just to justify their antisocial acts even to themselves, constantly, stoutly maintaining that they should never have been imprisoned at all. If AI Capion, Two Guns Crowley, Dutch Sulch, and the desperate men and women behind prison walls don't blame themselves for anything, What about the people who you and I come in contact? John Wanamaker, the founder of the store that bear his name, once confessed, "I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence." Wanamaker learned this lesson early, but I personally had through this old world for a third or country before even it began to dawn upon me for the 99th time out of 100. People don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Criticism is futile because it puts a person on the defensive and usually makes him strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's precious pride, hurts his sense of importance, and arouses resentment. B.F. Sinclair, the world-famous psychologist, proved through his experiment that an animal rewarded for good behavior will learn much more rapidly than retain what it learns far more effectively than an animal punished for bad behavior. Later studies have shown that same applies to human. By criticizing, we do not make lasting changes and often incur resentment. Hence, Saley, another great psychologist, said, "As much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation." The resentment that criticism engenders can demoralize employees, family members, and friends, and still not correct the situation that had been condemned. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator of engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to see that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on the job in the field. He reported that whoever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority of regulations and that they must comply. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often after he left, the workers would remove the hats. He decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing the hard hat, he asked if the hat were uncomfortable or did not fit properly. Then he reminded the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulations with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of futility of criticism blistering on 1,000 pages of history. Take, for example, the famous quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft, a quarrel that split the Republican Party, the Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and wrote blood luminously across the First World War and altered the flow of history. Let's review the facts quickly. There you are, human nature in action. Wrongdoers blaming everybody but themselves. We are like that. So when you and I are tempted to criticize something tomorrow, let's remember A.I. Capin, Tugan Carley, and Albert Fall. Let's realize that criticism are like homing pigeons. They're always returned home. Let's realize that persons we're going to correct and condemn will probably justify himself or herself and condemn us in return. Like the gentle theft will say, "I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have." On morning April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln lay dying in a hall bedroom of cheap lodging house directly across of the street from Trott's Theater, where John Wilkes Booth had shot him. Lincoln's long body lay stretched diagonally across a sagging bed that was too short for him. A cheap reproduction of Rosa Bonheur, famous painting The Horse Fair, hung above the bed, and a disassembled gas jet flickered yellow light. As Lincoln lay dying, Secretary of War sat and said, "There lies the most perfect ruler of men that the world has ever seen." even after Lincoln had become practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois.